And we're on Coalition Purple.
You
Here we
see
are
again?
again. Hey, check this out.
Ah, very nice.
Got your merch
Very,
on.
very good.
These were really comfy.
Yeah. No, it was that place was good. That
Yeah,
place was good.
no, it's cool. So it's like I'll be wearing the t-shirt next week probably.
Yeah. Well, I'll try and make more of a habit of having the hat on. I mean, my hair is nothing spectacular to see, so why not wear a hat, right?
Anyways, hey, get the name out there any way we can. So hey, what's going on your way, and anything new on the fire situation your way?
Um, kind of yes and no. I was out visiting some family in Las Vegas last week,
Yeah,
and my nephew's uh, girlfriend's parents lost some property, and so
yeah.
that was the first that I had actually heard of that. So, and a little bit more bad news, but basically it's more of the same old with the fires. They're starting to get contained, so that's
Yeah.
good. The power is back on in Malibu, so that's good. Um, things are sort of progressing along, but a lot of the conversations that we had while I was out visiting family was that the idea that, once the fire gets put out, that's the initial part of the tragedy that needs to get under control. Then it's going to be the challenge of trying to rebuild everything. And everybody that I've talked to so far is more or less of the same mind, which is it's going to be brutally bad to try and rebuild anything in California the way things are right now. It's going to be a mess.
In terms of because of the regulations and all that kind of stuff.
Well, the thing is that we were talking about is like one of the things you always hear about, because Malibu and the Palisades. There's a lot of talk about how there's all these. Well, they're all just rich people. It's a bunch of rich people. First of all, that's wrong.
No,
It's not. It's they're
definitely
not
in
all.
Altadena,
Right.
especially in
Yeah.
Altadena.
And the other part of it is though, okay, but let's say for the sake of argument, you are a rich person. And you want to rebuild your house. You got all this money, and you're going to do it. You don't even need the insurance. Put the insurance disaster besides. Well, the thing is, you may be ready to go to rebuild your house, but if there's no water and there's no electricity and there's a mountain of red tape that you have to get through, well, how are you gonna rebuild? There's no utilities. You can't just build a house and then magically import, water and electricity.
Right.
Because all that stuff was destroying the fire too. The
Yeah.
underground utility lines are most likely damaged. You're going to have pollution and potentially poisonous water issues, until that gets sorted out. The electrical infrastructure, which is all a bunch of poles and shouldn't be on poles anyway, and half the time gets turned off. And so that's not going to work out so well. And so, how do they, even prepare the area to get ready to build again?
Right.
And so there's going to be a whole bunch of issues sort of going around doing that kind of thing, and how quickly the city responds to things. And I mean, at this point, I don't really have much faith in the city of Los Angeles responding quickly to anything. So we'll
Yeah.
just have to see what happens.
Well, just the cleanup alone
Oh, it's
is
going to be
just
bad.
monumental. I mean, to clear out that many places and get it to any form that you could even think about doing anything else is just going to take forever. I mean, I know there's, and again, it's a little bit different situation, obviously, but when the tsunami or whatever, or the fire hit in Hawaii, what, a year or
Yeah.
two ago, I mean, they're still just trying to clean up from that. And that,
Yep.
obviously, it's a little harder where they're at, but it's not going to be a whole lot easier in California either. It's crazy, that part. So, yeah, I know. It's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, and and then of course all the blame game will go on for a few years, and the buck will get passed back and forth for a long time, and whatever. And so, but I mean, I don't know.
Well,
It's going to be very
hopefully
interesting.
the silver lining is it does, like we talked about a little bit. It has a bit of a wake up call in terms of some of the building restrictions and all. Not again, it's this fine balance. I mean, you don't want people to build unsafe housing and all that kind of
Right.
stuff. At the same time, you don't want to bog it down so much that it's almost impossible to build anything in
Yeah.
California. And And so hopefully it brings people together where they kind of figure out, because I mean, we just almost, and at least in the Southern California area, doubled our homeless population.
Yeah, it's gonna be nasty. And we weren't dealing well with the homeless population that we had.
That's right.
So
I
now,
know.
now it's going to be even worse.
Yeah.
And as far as I'm concerned, though, there was just one more thought that I have. I've sort of simplified down what I think needs to go forward in the future, and I'll just sort of throw it out there. And that is better brush clearance, better water infrastructure, better electrical infrastructure.
Yeah.
If you have a situation where you can clear the brush around the areas where the fire risk is the greatest, and I mean, there were warnings about the fire and the winds and everything that was happening in days before. So we need a dedicated brush clearing uh, agency.
Yeah.
I've heard that Parks and Recs is a little bit involved in the clearing of brush in various places, but I think there needs to be sort of either an independent group or more connected with the fire department, where every fire department, every firehouse has a brush clearing component. And, they go out and they proactively clear brush in areas of high density.
Yeah.
And, you could potentially prevent a lot of this stuff from going on in the future. Because, again, I think we talked about this last week, the idea about you expect people to take care of their roads and they
Right.
never
They're
do.
not going to do it.
It's people are not going to clear the brush. We know this now. I mean, it's proven. And so we need to be more proactive about it and have, brush clearing be a real priority. And
Yeah.
then, of course, the water infrastructure part is pretty obvious, because if for whatever the reason was that there wasn't sufficient water in the areas at the time, whether it's because there wasn't actually water, or because a reservoir was shut down, or because the flow rate in the pipes wasn't great enough, or because there wasn't enough ability to maintain water pressure, whatever the problem was, should have
And it
been
was kind of a
known.
combination of all those things.
Right. It should have been known a long time ago.
Yeah.
And now that we do know it, we should make sure that, we have, people in place that are proactive enough that they actually go out and they test the mains. They see what the pressure is. They see how it changes when you have one hydrant open, or two hydrants open, or five hydrants open. And, the more and more people you get, the more and more hydrants there are. And the bigger the fire is, the more hydrants that open. So that drops the water pressure and blah, blah, blah. But these are solvable, knowable things. But
Right.
no, the politicians in California just haven't cared about it in
Yeah.
forever. And now it's a little
Well,
bit too late, but at least going forward, we should do something about that.
yeah. Well, and it's the age old problem where that kind of stuff is just not sexy enough to get
Right.
headlines.
They don't do it.
They just don't do it. And because it was a known quantity. I mean, as more and more comes out, this was not a surprise to most people.
Yeah.
That this was going to happen. It wasn't a matter of when, in terms of it happening. It was just a matter of when it was going to happen. And so, again, hopefully there's a silver lining in that now we're going to get the electric lines off the poles and
Yeah.
underground where it should be.
Right. Because that was the
The
last
hard
part of
way
it.
of going about it, but
Yeah.
right?
But yeah. Well, and as
Yeah,
I say, because the last thing is I was going to say about the electrical component, because that was the last thing that I mentioned, is that, so many of the fires in the air theoretically are started by down power lines.
yeah,
When it comes up, power lines get knocked down, you get a fire.
yeah,
Well, obviously, you bury the power lines. And we should have been doing that, consistently over the years. And every new construction that gets done, don't put up poles, put the power
yeah,
lines under the ground. And all these things, obviously cost money. But again, you start looking at, Los Angeles especially, and California overall, and all the money that we waste on various things, and all the ways that we could make things better and easier, and less red tape and less bureaucracy. If the politicians wanted to come up with the money to do the things that made sense, the money is already there. They could get it. They just have to stop wasting it on a bunch of crap.
right. Well, and yeah, it'll be expensive, but this disaster is going to be pretty darn expensive.
Oh yeah,
So
yeah.
you pay now or you pay later, man.
Hmm.
It's like there's no real mystery about that. But yeah, talking about that blame game, I just have to mention this because it was one of those laugh out loud moments for me because, as you know, I'm really into goats, and so it popped up in my feed of Newt Gingrich was on, I don't know, Fox, I think it was, of course, And he was, blaming, all these wacky things going on in California is what caused the fires. And, they should have been doing this, should have been doing that. Some of it's legit. I don't deny some of it. But then he's like bringing up, yeah, and they just don't think about these simple things. Like, just think about it. The Reagan Library had goats that have been just always eating around the perimeter and keeping the brush down and all that kind of stuff. And they're doing it also in Laguna Beach or someplace. He says, this doesn't have to be really high tech and all this kind of stuff. And it was like he was saying it like this was this amazing brainstorm the Reagan Library had. And I'm
Yeah.
like going there, dude, man, the goats have been clearing brush since thousands of years ago. This is nothing new.
Yeah.
And there's brush clearing goat companies all over. There's SDG&E hires some for around the wires and stuff. And it was just like, can we just stop with the silliness? It's like, I'm glad it happened. I'm glad it worked. It proves the concept. So that was good
Yeah.
for the Reagan Library. But it's like, this is not a new idea, dude.
Yeah.
So,
Well, but again, it just goes back to what I was saying too. But just to go back into the brush clearing, there are so many ways and avenues and means of clearing brush, but
yes,
it just has to be done in an organized fashion. And
absolutely.
again, relying on each individual homeowner to clear a certain amount of brush
No.
around their houses, and then you starting to get into public land that you can't clear because you're abutted right against some the natural areas on the hillsides and whatever. The state just needs to be like, okay, this is an area of high population density. We can see where the houses come up to where the brush is.
Yep.
We're going to clear 100 feet of this brush away, and now you give a notice to the homeowners. Hey, we'll be in
Yeah.
January, and we're going to wipe out 100 feet of brush around this area, and
Yeah.
then just go do it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the only way it will get done.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No question about it. Well, and it's kind of like a lot of the other wildfires, not only in California, but all throughout the western states. The vast majority of wildfires are on federal land.
Right.
And it's like, so it's one of those things where the same sort of thought process has to be put towards that. And, again, that's not where the priority, generally speaking, is. It's about reacting, not being proactive about it. And, hopefully we learn our lesson at some point.
Yeah.
But
Well, you would have thought we would have learned the lesson after maybe Paradise Fire, or
yeah,
after seeing what happened in Maui, or
yeah,
any number of other things. And that's, I think, really why it's so inexcusable that this really did happen, is because there have been so many instances to take a step back and be like, okay, well, here was
right.
the problem. They built a housing, unit, and they built all these houses up to the hills, and the hills backed right into the chaparral, and
Yeah,
then the chaparral caught on fire, and then it lit the houses on fire, and then there was insufficient water infrastructure to deal with it once it got in and amongst the houses,
yep,
and it happens over and over again. And it's
yep,
always the same things, and
yeah,
then no one fixes anything.
yeah. No, I know.
So we've had,
Well,
like, bills and legislation passed and whatever, that all these things are supposed to get done, and then they don't do them.
yeah. Well, there again, it always keeps coming back around. We need new thinking. And the only
Mhm.
way we're going to get new thinking is to get other voices that matter in terms of a third, fourth, fifth party out
Yep.
there. Just kind of force those issues because it's just to bring it back towards the center somehow. Just, okay, can we think without, you know, naming and calling people names and all that? What do we have to do just to solve this problem? And
Yeah.
we just have lost that. On that note, though, I did one positive thing that I saw this past week, and maybe you'd seen this before. This is from a few months ago. I didn't even realize this had happened. But back in the November elections, that Maine, the state of Maine,
Mhm.
had a referendum on their ballot to reform campaign finance. And so their whole premise is, with campaign finance laws, that it was, unlimited amounts of money that unions and companies can do and all that. And a part of that, when that was approved basically by the Supreme Court, was the fact that with super PACs, since the money isn't going directly to a campaign, there isn't a quid pro quo, right? So it's like I'm
Yeah.
putting money over here, but you know, the politician really doesn't have control over what happens to that money, which is like, me. But
It's fungible. It's stupid. The
and
whole idea.
so the whole premise of their thing was they're going to court to, and it was never fought on that. It was like that was the rationale to allow Citizens United to happen. That
Mhm.
hey, we have this third party in the middle, so there's no way for you know quid pro quo. They're
Yeah.
going back and saying, well, in our state, we're not allowing it because we have proof that they are aligning and coordinating super
Yeah.
PACs, and so they're limiting whether it's a union or a company or whatever to $5,000
Yeah.
to a
Yep.
campaign. To a
Yeah.
campaign. Kind of going back to what you've always said about we need to limit the amount they can spend.
Yeah.
Period.
That's
And this, and this is a
I've
first
always thought
step.
that was the way. Yeah.
And they know it's going to be appealed and all that,
Oh
but
yeah.
it was never fought on the quid pro quo piece of this, and they feel that they've got a really good shot because it's like, and they're also using things like where um, Trump came out, once Elon Musk started pouring money into his campaign, and
Yeah.
literally said because he was anti EV cars, right?
Hmm.
And now he's come out in several statements saying when people are asking about what are you going to do about EV cars, he said, well, I'm going to be supporting them. Elon was one of my biggest backers. I mean, he's literally
Shocking turn of events there. Who would
he
have thought
he
that would
literally says that in public. Hey, Elon was a big contributor. I'm all for EVs now.
have?
So it's like, even though Elon put it through a super PAC and all that kind of stuff,
Yep.
and so that was good news that came out of this week, and that happened back in November, and through all the craziness that Trump's been reelected and all that. I guess I just totally missed it, and it came up in my feed for some reason. It's like, wow, that's great, that's cool, and
Yeah.
back
No,
to getting it down to the local level.
I'll check that out and I'll see what I can make of it. But there was actually, because it was funny that you mentioned the Elon Musk thing, because there was one other thing that's been sort of rolling around that I think is a little bit interesting, and that's the whole getting rid of TikTok thing. So, first of all, I don't do TikTok. I don't know really anything about TikTok. I'm not a
It'll have no impact whatsoever on me.
no, not a TikTok person. But apparently, it's supposed to go dead like this weekend or
Yeah,
something like that. I'm not. I don't know
Sunday.
all the exact details because I say I'm not a super TikToky person. But Trump apparently is trying to keep TikTok alive, and a big part of that is that apparently it was a very successful part of his campaign to use TikTok. So now he has an interest in keeping TikTok alive. But it's not just that he has an interest in keeping it alive. It's also sort of the idea about why is there an interest in getting rid of it in the first place? And that has to do with the idea that it's run by the Chinese and the Chinese are able to use it to have undue influence over people. But every time I hear these arguments, I always just have sort of the same question, especially since I'm not influenced by TikTok at all, is that how much of an influence do these things really have? Because like in the first Trump administration, it was the whole Russiagate thing. It's like, oh my God, the Russians, they bought advertising on Facebook, and it had this huge. It's like I never saw a Russian Facebook ad,
Right.
so it's like we're
That you
canceling
know of.
doing things. Well, yeah, that I know of, but it's like I just always wonder if there's any way to quantify the influence of these things, or whether or not they really are making that much of a difference, whether it is warranted to cancel TikTok. And then going back to what you were saying about the influence peddling, if TikTok buys Truth Social, which is Trump's company, and I think there is a rumor that something like that might happen. It might be a merger or something. In theory, that could net Trump billions.
Billions. Yeah.
And so if Trump nets billions from the sale of social to TikTok, and he's responsible for keeping TikTok alive, and TikTok is owned by the Chinese, I mean, what does anyone make of that? I mean, that's going to be a big mess.
Yeah. Well, and also the other rumors going around is that Elon Musk will buy it, right? So
Right.
who would actually that would make almost more sense in a way, but it's all gotten so intertwined because Trump was actually again, I mean, was actually for banning TikTok until this last election, when
Right. When he found the
so
benefit for it.
right, because that was the one thing that Biden and Trump agreed on, that there was potentially some shady stuff going on from the Chinese government through TikTok, and so, but how things change, when money comes around.
Right. But the other thing is though, it's like it's interesting because one, I think people can change their mind. I mean, if Trump had this big interaction with TikTok in the last election and he was like, "Hey, TikTok is great. I really do like it. I'm changing my mind on it." I mean, you could change your mind on things.
Sure.
That's legitimate. And then as far as like making lots of money while you're president or being in a business, there's always it's always a little bit problematic because you got to know where the money is coming from, or how it's working, or what the actual influence of it is. But at the same time, I absolutely hate career politicians. I think career politicians are the absolute worst and make the worst decisions because they've never lived anything. They've never done anything. They don't have any skin in the game. They haven't built anything. They aren't affected by their own legislation. They just insulate themselves from it because they did nothing but politicians all the time. So I like the idea of having people with an economic background and a business building background coming into politics. But if you're going to say that they have to confiscate all their acquisitions, and then they have to stop, being able to make money, well, then you're never going to get people like that into office because, they're going to be like, oh, I'm not throwing away everything I built my entire life just
Right.
to, run for office.
Yeah.
So it's like there's got to be this weird balance. And I think the thing with TikTok is really interesting because, again, if Trump just out of, for the sake of argument, makes $5 billion from some kind of arrangement, I mean, you have to investigate that, right? I mean, you have to know he just pocketed $5 billion, right? So you can't just be like, oh, well, he's a real good businessman, and that's fine.
Right.
I mean, yeah, but he's also the president.
Right.
And did he make the $5 billion because he's a good businessman and because it was a good business deal for a lot of people, or because somebody just paid off the president for $5 billion?
Right.
And so it really becomes really interesting about how you have to look at things and how you have to do things. So it also, I mean, and I'm kind of going in a circle here too, but you keep thinking about these things. Part of what was so bad about the lawfare against Trump and the Russia collusion, Russia collusion hoax nonsense BS is that when something like this comes along and Trump might be selling $5 billion worth of Truth Social to the Chinese, a lot of people, if there's an investigation, are just going to look at that and it's like, here we go again, same old BS. I don't put any faith in it. I'm not going to pay attention to it. But that, really is something if you're making that kind of money while you're the sitting president.
Yeah.
So it's like it's kind of this. We've gotten into this bad cycle.
No, it's a really bad cycle, and the way way it's been handled in the past is they would put things in blind trusts and all that.
Yeah.
He's not the first rich guy to run for office. I mean, Mitt Romney kind of had the same issue, not to the extent Trump did, but I mean, he was a really wealthy guy and all that kind of stuff. And, they put it in a blind trust. But I mean, I look at blind trust kind of like the super PACs. They say, well, they can't see what's going
Yeah.
on and all that. It's like, is that true? Really? I'm not so sure.
And in Trump's case, who's running his trust? His kids.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
I mean, it's like,
Exactly. It's like, I'm not so sure about that. So
Yeah.
it is definitely a problem, but all the more reason why we need to get money out of the politics part of it, because I have no problem with rich people running for office, particularly if they've built something, to your point, but we want obviously people that have some integrity along
Yeah.
the way, right? And that's what we're kind of missing these days on all sides.
Yeah.
I mean, there's the integrity portion of it has just gone out the window, and then you layer on top of just all the funny political crap going on. And I hate to keep coming back around, but all the more reason we need more voices.
Yeah.
And people please just deregister for now. Figure
Yeah.
till, just to send the message.
Yeah, no, deregistration I think is really the key. I mean, we if we could all just register, unregister from the Democrats, unregister from the Republicans, register as in independents, and then start thinking independently.
Yep.
We could really build something because I really do believe that now is. I mean, of course, I've been saying things about this for like 40 years.
Now is really it.
Always saying that. Okay, now suddenly is the time after all these years. But anyway, the point being is that the Trump coalition in the Republican Party, I believe, is a flash in the pan. Trump is Trump. Trump will
Yep.
do Trump things. The people that voted for Trump and the coalition he sort of has around him, the Trump people, MAGA, call it whatever
Yeah.
you want. When Trump is gone, it's gone. And it goes back to being business as usual Republicans, as far as I can tell. And the business as usual Republicans are exactly the people who cannot get elected in a place like California.
Yeah.
And so at some point, there has to be something else. There
Yeah.
has to be a party that has a message that enough people are willing to get behind that it becomes a banner that can collect more support. And then, we can start injecting ideas and different ways of thinking about things into politics, especially local politics in places like California, but around the country just generally.
Yeah.
There's this famous Donald Rumsfeld thing, which is always people always quote the unknown knowns and the known knowns
Right.
and
Right. Right.
knowns and part of the problem with any single party system is that whatever inherent unknowns there are within that party, they just never even get thought of. They're the
No.
unknown unknowns. Nobody even bothers to even think about them.
No.
And I think a big part of the problem we had in the fires, to bring this whole conversation full circle, is that the politicians they don't think about it. They might think that if you really talk to them for a while, that upgrading our water infrastructure is a really great idea. But because they're spending all their time talking about homelessness and how they're going to win the next election, it never even occurs to them to think that they need to look and do a test of the local fire hydrants.
Right.
But if you have different parties that have different priorities, somebody can step in there and be like, hey, we haven't actually looked at the fire hydrants in about 30 years. Maybe we should do that. And then
Yeah.
everyone's like, oh, hey, that's kind
Yeah.
of a good idea. Well, let's send out some people to look at the fire hydrants.
Yeah.
And so it might not even be a fight. It might not even be something that people don't want to do. It just might be something that they just don't ever think about.
Yeah.
But you have to have that diversity of ideas. You have to have people with different life experiences looking at different things, doing different things, to have the ability to not have so many unknown unknowns.
Exactly. Yeah, and I equate it a little bit to business too, in the respect of where a lot of the innovation comes from is it within smaller companies.
Mhm.
And if you look at that from a company standpoint, really there aren't too many really, really big companies that are that innovative. They buy a lot of innovative companies, but they don't actually do the innovation themselves. And it's very much the same way with local governments and stuff. That's where a lot of the interesting stuff's going on because they're literally on the street having to solve whatever the problem is.
Right.
And so when you scale it up to the size of Los Angeles,
Yeah.
it gets really, really tough to your point, people just lose the imagination on how to solve these things.
And I
And
think that
it's a tough one.
there are too many good ideas that just get boxed out and shoved away in the name of maintaining political power. It's
Totally.
like the last thing you want to hear if you're winning all the elections is the idea that somebody's going to come along and change something. You don't want to change anything. You're winning
Yep.
all the elections. You control everything. You have all the power. Why would you ever want to listen to any kind of new idea or any way to change something or any way to do anything? If you interject some wins and losses into the record, and now it's no longer an automatic win so long as you're an incumbent following the same script that every other incumbent has followed, then you start to have the opportunity to have different ideas and people doing different things. But right now, there's no room for new ideas because
Nope.
everybody in power wants to follow the same script so that they can guarantee that they stay in power. So we need to send a message that following the same script won't keep you in power. And
Yeah.
until we can do that, we're just going to get more and more of the same. I mean, again, you and I have lived in Southern California for a long time. We've seen a lot of fires. We've seen a lot of problems with electrical infrastructure, with brush clearing, with
Nothing new.
water infrastructure. We've seen it for years and years and years. And it's like, and we're still not doing anything about it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, exactly. Well, and then just kind of in on a positive note too, I do get a sense that the time is now in
Mhm.
respect of you're hearing, from all sides, some of the disgruntled GOP who aren't Trumpers have been talking about, well, maybe it's time for a third party. I've heard Joe Manchin, who was supposedly a Democrat, he sided with the Republicans as much as anything else.
Yeah.
Hey, maybe it's time for a third party. Bernie Sanders, he's already a third party, basically on his own. Adam Kinzinger, he's talked about it. So maybe there's, some of these people that have been in part of the machine, if they would start coming together, and really helping drive that home, you know, you do need some of those people too that know how the machine
Well,
turns.
here's one thing that I'll say. I've always said that you need to have a third party that has an ideology that people can get behind.
Yeah,
But I think there is another way that you could see a third party arise, and that would be to have an absolute, complete, and total machine party. And it would suck in all the Liz Cheney types to go along with the Biden types, and stuck them all into this one big machine party that's just basically about the machine. And what that would do, it would open the way for reform within inside the Democrat and Republican parties to become something that's not the machine party. I
right.
mean, I'm not exactly sure how that would evolve, but again, let's just say, for example, for instance, for the sake of this discussion, that the anti-machine coalition at this point are the Trump people, the MAGA people. They're
Yeah,
anti-machine.
right.
So the Republican Party morphs into the anti-machine party, and instead of going back to business as usual when Trump is gone, it stays more like the anti-machine sort of Trump coalition type party. Then what arises after that is the machine party, which takes all the never Trump Republicans and all the hardcore Adam Schiff type Democrats, sucks them into the machine party. And then the Democrats become something more left wing, more sort of aligned with the Bernie Sanders wing of the party.
Right.
That gives you three parties. And even though I would never even begin to associate myself with the machine party, it would still essentially accomplish the goal of
Same
creating a
goal.
more diverse political
Yes.
system and at least allow space for there to be more ideas within the game. So honestly, if something like that happened, I'd actually be pretty happy. It would be weird, but I'd be pretty happy about
Well,
it.
and it might be the only reality of what could happen as long
Right.
as we don't change campaign finance. 'Cause at the end of the
Right.
day, it's all about money and power.
Yeah.
And with money comes power right now. That's been proven big time in this last election on both sides. It's not just it's just not an Elon Musk thing.
Yeah.
Um, Kamala Harris didn't just get a couple $1 billion falling out of the sky.
Right. No. Yeah.
So, yeah, it may be the realistic way to kind of move the ball forward a little bit. We'll
Yeah.
see.
But as I say, and also I've always felt like if you could get one new party to start that actually had some weight and you really started to diversify the political system, I think that would also open the door for a lot of other things, and we'd really have more of a multi-party system, which in my
Right.
opinion is what we need.
Yep. Yep. Hear you on that. All right. Well, we better end it there, and we'll keep solving the problems one at a time.
Yeah, keep knocking them down.
All righty. Talk to you next week.
Yep, sounds good. See you then.
Bye.
Bye.